Thank you and good morning. Welcome to the college. We are pleased to host this morning's Politics and Eggs and welcome Senator Portman to our campus in collaboration with our partners at New England Council. This is a special time of year for us. I always say if you listen very, very closely, you can hear the pitter-patter of size 12 Nikes as our athletes have made their way to campus. Our new class arrives on Friday, and I was telling Senator Portman, we are very blessed this year to have a class size 25 more students than we had last year. And so in this environment, that's a good thing. If you make your way up the hilltop, you will see a brand new residence hall that we built, and it is a very unique building because it is a living learning commons. We have 150 beds, but we also have as much common space as we do bedroom space. So there are 2 classrooms, there are gathering spaces, study lounges, recreational spaces, cooking areas, places for students to meet, to eat, and to greet. So we are very, very blessed to have that, and I was telling Tom Rath that when all is said and done, between our wait lists and students that have been put up in lounges and tripled, this year we have 2 empty beds on our campus. So that's either really good planning or dumb luck. So we're very, very happy. As many of you know, St. Anselm College and our New Hampshire Institute of Politics and Political Library is a premier forum and frequently the first step for those interested in our storied primary in New Hampshire's tried and tested political process. With the 2016 election on the horizon, St. Anselm College and the NHIOP will once again take a leading role in hosting town hall conversations, nationally broadcast debates, and gatherings like this one, where New Hampshire citizens, the media, and our students can reap the benefits of being first in the nation. We thank the New England Council for your continued partnership with the Institute of Politics. The New England Council remains the leading voice for the region's business community on Capitol Hill. The Council's tireless work of fostering collaboration among regional businesses and government thought leaders ensures a bright future for New England employers looking to hire graduates from campuses like ours in their offices, in their factories, their laboratories, and their boardrooms. So on behalf of our students, our faculty, staff, and the Benedictine monastic community who have studied, worked, and lived here for 125 years, welcome again to New Hampshire's home for politics, St. Anselm College, and welcome Senator Portman.
Well, good morning, and I too would like to thank our leader here at St. A's, Dr. Salvo, and his great assistant, Neil Lebec, not only for their kind words here this morning, but also for hosting, again, this event here at the Institute. As you know, the New England Council has had a fabulous working relationship with our president and Neil and his team here at the Institute as we work together on these Politics and Eggs events over the past several years. And needless to say, we're very happy to be back here again today. I'd also like to thank our Politics and Eggs series sponsors, whose banners you see around the room. The list is on the table of the people who make this possible. They are not only distinguished members of the New England Council, but they are truly great corporate neighbors here in New Hampshire and in New England, and we want to thank them for their generosity. Before I introduce our guest this morning, let me just tell you a few upcoming events for those of you who often travel to Washington. We have colleagues there. We're looking forward to seeing many of you at our next event in our Capital Conversation series, which is a huge success in Washington. On September 30th, we'll welcome Massachusetts Congressman Jim McGovern at a breakfast in our nation's capital. And of course, on October 9th, we'll be honored again to have so many of you who have been so supportive of us in the past to join us for our 2014 New England of the Year annual dinner. We have over 1,500 of neighbors from all 6 New England states. It truly is one of the region's most anticipated events, and will be something that I think you will enjoy. Well, today we're delighted to welcome back a special guest from Ohio, which probably will be the NBA championship city maybe later next year. We'll see. Senator Rob Portman, as he visits this great state. Senator Portman may be a native of the Buckeye State, but he truly is no stranger to New England. Having earned his undergraduate degree in anthropology from our own Dartmouth College, a respected institution, which just happens to be also a member of the New England Council. He went on to attend law school at the University of Michigan, and he established a very successful career as an expert in trade law in both Washington, D.C. and his native city of Cincinnati. In 1989, he began his career in public service by joining the first Bush White House. The senator had held several positions under the President George H.W. Bush, including Associate White House Counsel, Director of the White House Office of Legislative Affairs. And after several years in the White House, the senator returned to his great city in 1993 and did a very special election to fill the seat of a congressman who he thought very, very, very highly of, to say the least. He was successful, and he went on to represent, I believe, the 2nd Congressional District with honor and distinction for some 12 years. He resigned his seat in 2005 during the 2nd Bush administration, served for a year as the United States Trade Representative, and later as President George W. Bush's Director of the Office of Management and Budget. In 2010, the people of the great state of Ohio elected him to represent them in the United States Senate. And since that time, he's established a reputation as a leader in a variety of important economic issues, from a balanced federal budget to reforming our nation's entitlement and tax system. As a member of both the Senate Finance and Senate Budget Committees, he played a key role in the development of the Senate Republicans' Jobs for America plan, which was unveiled this past March. This plan is meant to serve as a blueprint to create private sector growth and strengthen our economy. And it recommends a range of reforms and new policies to foster private sector job creation. I'll just highlight a few because I think they're really well thought out. In all of the above, energy strategy, regulatory reform to cut red tape, businesses, investments, and STEM education to close that skills gap, increased exports and expanded access to foreign markets, and a very comprehensive tax reform that will enable businesses to grow and keep the jobs here in the United States. The Senator has been a vocal advocate for reforming our nation's Social Security, healthcare entitlement programs, and to help balance our federal budget. The New England Council was honored to host Senator Portman back in March during our annual spring event in Washington, D.C. Let me also say today, we are truly delighted to welcome him to the New England area once again. Please join me in welcoming a very special guest here, the Honorable Senator Rob Portman.
Jim, thanks very much. I just said, for a good Democrat to endorse the jobs plan is a big deal for me. But it's great to be back. I was honored to speak to your group, New England Council, which you guys were in Washington in March, and I talked a little about the legislative agenda at the time. It's great to be back. Talk a little more about that today. And have some politics and eggs with you. And it's good to be at St. A's. Thank you very much, Dr. DeSalvo, for having us. And I found out this morning why I was invited. About 3 months ago, Jane and I were in the kitchen kind of going through the mail, and there was this big package that came from New Hampshire. And we got a daughter up here in school, so I thought, wow, Sally's sending me something. This is great. No, it's from St. A's. And it was, invitation to speak to you all. I thought, well, I'm going to be up there for chaperone at some point anyway. I'd love to do that. And so I thanked Dr. DeSalvo today for inviting me, and he pointed to his son, Kevin. Andrew, who is a freshman at Fordham, and said actually it was Andrew who invited you. And so I appreciate Andrew's reaching out to us. It's great to be here. I also want to thank the Institute, and of course, good to be with a lot of great friends here this morning. Jim mentioned that I have been in New Hampshire some over the years, and I'm feeling like I'm here with a lot of folks who know me all too well, because Chris Hodgson, who's here at Comcast, told me that he was the guy that drove me around in 1996 with Bob Dole when I played a surrogate. And I remember him that well because I remember at one point sliding down one of the exit ramps on the ice, practically getting in the middle of I-90 with I-89 traffic. But my best recollection was when we were up somewhere in northern New Hampshire doing these campaign debates, and Bob Dole couldn't come to the debates, so he sent me instead. And it was me and about 5 candidates, none of whom you will remember, except maybe the guy who was known as the Grizzly Bear. Remember him? He was from Alaska. He had his own motorhome. He was going around New Hampshire. He was a millionaire from Alaska, and we had a fun time debating that time. It was my first presidential debate, in a Republican primary. There was a bunch of folks who were doing their thing, and that's the wonderful thing about New Hampshire is that candidates come here and they have to be authentic because people in New Hampshire can look right through them. And going to the coffee classes and doing these debates and town hall meetings, I think it's fantastic. It gives us all the opportunity to see politics the way it ought to be. I was asked this morning to talk about what's happening legislatively in Washington. That would be a very short speech. Not a whole lot's happening. And there's a reason that Congress has a 10% approval rating. I gave a speech recently in Cincinnati and said to the audience, 10%, that means basically just paid staff and family members. And Jane, who was in the audience at the time, as she is this morning, spoke up and said, don't count on it. So, look, I think instead of talking about what's happening in Washington, I think we should be more productive to talk about what should be happening and what can happen. And I'm actually very hopeful about the future of our country, but I think we're in trouble right now. And I think we're in trouble both on the international stage, as we've seen over the last 24 hours, even in places like Iraq, Syria, Libya, and Ukraine. But also we're in trouble here at home. And unless we change direction and come up with a new direction, I'm really worried that America will continue to slip in our leadership, and the people of our great country will continue to fall behind. So that's what I want to talk about, is how we can find a new direction to get back on our feet. Internationally, I watched the news last night, which was probably a mistake because there was nothing good. Fires burning literally around the world. And again, seeing what's happened in Ukraine in the last month was poignant for me. I was there during the presidential election only a few months ago. And at that time, people of Ukraine were crying out for American leadership, saying, we want your help, we want your backing. We'd like to have some help to be able to defend ourselves. We have not been forthcoming with that. And I think we should step it up and be more aggressive in helping them. Certainly here in New Hampshire, with the tragic death of Jim Foley, the people in New Hampshire have seen, once again, the fact that evil does exist in the world. And the brutality, tragic circumstances of his death remind us that this group, ISIS, truly is a national security threat to our country. This morning, our thoughts and prayers go out to the family of Jim Foley. And I think, again, it reminds us of the fact that without American leadership, a vacuum is created. And into that vacuum, chaos and violence tends to ensue. We are reluctant leaders. America is the sole remaining superpower. And we don't always embrace that enthusiastically. But I think what we've seen, again, around the world, even in the last 24 hours, is that America is not engaged and involved. Not only do the people of this country suffer, and we now have humanitarian crises in places like northern Iraq with Iraqi Christians and Yazidis and other religious minorities, as well as Sunnis and Shia. But also America's national security is threatened. And if ISIS has the opportunity to establish this caliphate they're talking about, it certainly is a platform for terrorism and a concern for us and hopefully the love of people. So I know Americans are weary of war. I am too. All of us are. And I know that we only reluctantly accept our responsibility as a sole remaining superpower. But the reality is that we are the one indispensable country. And if we're not out there leading, don't expect others. When I was U.S. Trade Representative, Jim talked about that role. It was a great honor. I went around the world representing our country. And I had the opportunity to talk about how we should be knocking down barriers to trade, fighting corruption, promoting transparency, promoting free markets. And often in public, not always, but often in public, and always in private, my fellow trade ministers would say to me, thank goodness America's out there. Because if we weren't, no one else was going to do it. And not the Europeans, who were frankly completely happy with regulated trade or protectionism that worked for them. Not the emerging economies concerned about protecting some of their industries. But it was America who was out there talking about the need for us to knock down these barriers, which ultimately is for the well-being of the citizens of all these countries. And I think the same is true across the board. Whether it's human rights, or whether it's democracy building, or whether it's keeping the Straits of Hormuz open or the South China Sea, America is the indispensable country. And people say, well, we can't be the world's policeman. I agree. It's maybe more like the sheriff. We've got to get a posse. We can't do it alone. And that posse of allies is what we need. And what, frankly, we don't have right now. Because without showing that leadership, and instead leading from behind, it's impossible for us to grow that group of other countries who can work with us to be able to solve some of the real problems we face around the world. America's role in the world, of course, can only be strong if we're strong here at home. And that's my other concern, and frankly, I believe we're in deep trouble here at home. Again, I'm hopeful about the future, but I look at what's happened over the last several years and I think, wow, is this it? Is this the new normal? It can't be. We're now living in the weakest economic recovery since the Great Depression. And when you look at the GDP growth, you look at the jobs numbers, people can say there's a little improvement here and there, but the reality is that this is a remarkably flat economy. Growth this year is about 1%, last year about 2%. Again, folks are saying, well, that's just the way it's going to be. It can't be that way. Because that doesn't enable us to see the kind of upward mobility, the kind of opportunity that we've grown accustomed to. And I think with this weak economy, the American dream is really in trouble. Jim mentioned this Jobs for America plan, and I'll talk about it in a second because I do think it has some of the components to be able to get us back on our feet. Here it is. I can give it to anybody who's interested. But the idea here is to take all our institutions of our economy, from taxes to energy to healthcare, trade, certainly, our ability to be able to compete globally by having a better education system and having worker retraining that works, the need for us to be able to have regulations that make sense for small businesses. A number of you here who talked to me earlier about your businesses and regulatory environments. All these things, America's looking behind because we're not addressing the issues. Some of my friends tell me when I talk about this, including in the last couple of days, a good debate with a conservative Republican friend of mine, Rob, you're talking about Washington doing more. Washington should be doing less. And here in the live free or die state, I imagine some of you agree with that. The less Washington does, the better. But I would disagree. I think we're at a moment in our history where Washington ought to be doing more to create freedom, to change these fundamental economic systems that don't allow for the prosperity and the free enterprise system that we've become accustomed to over the years. The reason we're living through the weakest economic recovery in the history of our country, in my view, is because we have not stepped forward and made the kind of changes that are necessary to unleash the entrepreneurial power of America. So I think the partisan gridlock that we see in D.C. does have real consequences. We're missing the opportunity to engage on these issues and therefore to be able to help people get back on their feet. The American dream is at risk, and many people in this room understand that because you've experienced it. And you don't see it today, I grew up in a small business family. When I was a kid, my dad left a job as a salesman where he had a commission and he had health care and a little retirement plan, and he gave it all up to be able to start his own business, as many of you have. We started off with 5 people. My mom was the bookkeeper. It was a forklift truck dealership in Cincinnati, Ohio. And lost money in the first few years, which was a little awkward since he had borrowed money from my mom's uncle to start the business. Because he couldn't get a loan from the bank. Does that sound familiar? And over the years, he found his footing, and he ended up, by the time he retired, my brother took over the business, having about 300 people working for him. I worked there. Today, some of the guys I've known my whole life who turned a wrench their whole career, technicians, mechanics, will retire with $400,000 or $500,000 in the 401k profit sharing. That's the American dream. To be able to provide for yourself and your family, grow something, create something for others. I worry about it because of the fact that Washington is in gridlock and not dealing with these issues. I also worry about it because the American spirit is in trouble. The most troubling poll I've seen all summer was not about a Senate race, although I am following some of those closely, as you can imagine. But it was about the American dream. It was an NBC Washington. It was an NBC Wall Street Journal poll earlier this month, so you may have seen it. It showed that 76% of Americans do not believe the next generation will be better off than our generation. 76%. These are record numbers. We've never seen anything like this. Also, another poll, CNN poll, asked young people, what do you think? Are you going to be better off than your folks? And again, over 60% said no. So, again, there seems to be almost a resignation right now in America. People saying, we just have to live with this. It's a new normal. It's not. It doesn't have to be that way. It's no wonder that people feel that way because, again, take-home pay is down about $4,000 on average. Poverty rates are up. Of course, healthcare costs and other costs for basic needs are up, creating that middle-class squeeze that many of you feel, many of you hear about. If this recovery were as strong as the average of the 10 recoveries since World War II, just as strong as the average, per capita income would be $6,000 higher, and almost 14 million more Americans would be working today. So that shows you, what we tried hasn't worked. And it's time to get busy on an aggressive reform agenda. Yesterday, I was in New Hampshire talking to a friend about this, and I told him some stories from some people I know in Ohio who have lost their jobs and not been able to find something that was comparable. Some of them are working. He said, Rob, a lot of my friends are now consultants. They're self-employed. They're in their 50s or in their 60s. They lost their job, maybe with an insurance company, maybe with a bank, maybe with a manufacturer. And they haven't been able to get back on their feet and find that job, so they just kind of become consultants, meaning they're self-employed. They're really looking for work. And I see some heads nodding. If you look at the labor participation rate, which means, the percentage of people working in America, we're at record lows from that. It goes back to the 1940s. I saw something recently in connection with the situation in Missouri, and it was a discussion about the African-American community, African-American men. And the point was made that the labor participation rate among African-American males, particularly younger men, was remarkably low. Again, probably historic levels going back to the 1940s. Among men and women combined, it goes back to the 1970s, an era we don't want to repeat. This was during the Carter administration. I saw Jimmy Carter up here on the board, and I immediately reminded me of double-digit unemployment, double-digit interest rates. That's certainly not where we want to be. So I do think there's an opportunity for us to get back to the kind of growth that we have been used to since World War II. And this can't be the new normal. It's not who we are. This little proposal we talked about, and Jim mentioned it, and I told him again he did a great job with it, is important because it says that not only is there an agenda here to win elections, but there's a blueprint for success. So, I'm working on a Republican majority in the United States Senate. I'm doing it, frankly, because I think we've got to change this dynamic in D.C. We've got to break through this gridlock. And to me, the only way you do that is to get the president to the table and start discussing some of these issues. It takes two to tango. So it also has to be something that Republican leadership in the House and Senate is going to do. I certainly hope that's going to be true if we get the majority. And by the way, this has been done before. You know, Ronald Reagan never had a majority in the United States Congress. And yet, in 1986, working with Tip O'Neill and Bill Bradley and others, we put together the tax reform that, in my view, was critical to the economic growth we saw over the next couple decades. In 1983, again, working with Tip O'Neill, Dan Rostenkowski, and Democrats, and he put in place Social Security reform. The last time we really reformed any of our incredible, vital programs on the mandatory side of the budget, the entitlement spending program. But they're unsustainable in their current form. So this is not something that we haven't done before. Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich didn't particularly like each other. And yet they were able to work together to put forward not just welfare reform, but also a balanced budget, also some tax reform. So that's what can and should be done. And let me give you 3 examples of what could be done, I think, in the first 100 days. One is an all-of-the-above energy strategy that does, among other things, approve the Keystone XL pipeline to begin to make us energy independent in North America and to create the biggest public infrastructure project in America. But also all of the above, meaning looking at all of our sources of energy, including efficiency. Second, I think we can see immediate expansion of exports. And people talk about the fact that the president's out there trying to negotiate trade agreements, but the fact is he cannot be successful, in my view, having been in that trade rep job that we talked about earlier, without the ability to be able to take these agreements to Congress for an up or down vote. Every president in the United States since FDR has had that ability, has asked for that ability. It's crucial in order to finish the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the so-called TTIP agreement with the Europeans. And yet this president, although he called for it in the State of the Union, has allowed Harry Reid to block it. The day after the State of the Union speech, Harry Reid basically said, "Over my dead body." And without presidential leadership, it's not going to happen. With the Republican majority, it would happen. And we would get busy getting American workers and American farmers and service providers back in the business of expanding our exports and creating jobs. In the time since the last time we had trade promotion authority, several years ago, there were over 300 trade agreements negotiated. We're not a party to any of them because of the lack of this ability to negotiate agreements. That could happen. It could happen in the first 100 days. Tax reform. Today we heard news about Burger King, the latest company, that may be converting. These are companies that choose to merge with companies usually much smaller than them overseas, and then become domiciled in those foreign countries in order to lower the taxes. A company in Ohio did it last year. It's a manufacturer, one of the great manufacturers in Ohio. They merged with a company 1/4 their size in Ireland. We're now saving about $160 million a year in taxes. We need to stop that. The way to stop it is to reform our outdated and inefficient tax code. I mean, everyone agrees. If we simply say we're going to go after this on a case-by-case basis or put a Band-Aid in place to try to punish companies who are inverting, what will happen? We'll continue to see investment jobs going overseas. And more U.S. companies will become targets of foreign takeovers. I'm a beer drinker. I'm sure there aren't any others in the room this morning. Kind of early. But try to buy American beer. The largest is Sam Adams, a New England beer company. 1.4% market share. The rest are all foreign owned. Yingling may object to that and say they've got 1.5% this month. I don't know, so be careful. But here's the point. This is happening as we sit here this morning. American companies in boardrooms all across this nation are listening to people come to them and pitch them the fact that they should become foreign because the U.S. government is not doing the right thing to create an environment for success. And again, getting back to our discussion earlier about what Washington should be doing, Washington should be lowering the tax rate, which is the highest in the world now among all the developed countries, changing the international system so it's competitive, and allowing businesses to prosper and flourish right here in America. Clearly, that's what we should be doing. The president talks about it, but shows no leadership to get it done. I think with the Republican majority, again, the responsibility goes both ways. We have to ensure that we do put in place immediately the kind of reforms to keep businesses here, and to keep jobs here. And who's the beneficiary of that? It's the workers. All the studies show the same thing. The National Budget Office did one recently saying over 70% of the benefit of lowering the tax rate of the corporations will go to who? The workers. This is all about these good middle-class jobs that all of us want to create. If we don't do these things, open up our ability to negotiate trade agreements, fix our tax code so it works, come up with a way to deal with energy so we can take advantage of these great opportunities we have with an all-of-the-above strategy, deal with healthcare costs, deal with the regulations, reform our education systems so we can be competitive around the world again. If we don't do these things, America will continue to fall behind. If we do them, I believe our best days are ahead of us. One thing that's putting a wet blanket over the entire economy is our record debt, the deficit. And when I'm in New Hampshire, I hear about this a lot. Frankly, more so than some other cities. Did you guys get it? You cannot continue to spend behind your means and expect to succeed. You can't do it in your family budget, you can't do it in your business. So part of this economic plan, part of what we're talking about here is we have a budget. Not having had one for the past 5 years is one of our problems. And that budget has to say, what are the priorities? Erskine Bowles of Simpson Bowles famously said, this is the biggest economic crisis we face, and the most predictable one. If we don't deal with this issue, we will have another financial crisis. Record levels of debt mean that in this administration we're likely to see more debt being added to the nation's balance sheet than all of the presidents in the history of this country combined. To the point that for young people graduating from St. A, some of whom I met this morning, they're looking at $40,000 per graduate in terms of the national debt, on top of the roughly $29,000 per graduate, the average around America in terms of student debt. On top of the fact that Obamacare doesn't work for them because, of course, much of the increased payments are going to come from younger people, healthier people. On top of the fact that they're going to have a tough time finding a job, with 50% of graduates last year not being able to find a job that match their degree. These are things young people should be very concerned about, and all of us should be. Because in order to keep that American promise, to be able to make that American dream real, we've got to deal with the debt deficit. President Kennedy once said famously, a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think he's largely right, but not entirely. All the economic growth things we talked about today, all the importance of having pro-growth policies and changing these policies and institutions is necessary but not sufficient. We've also got to deal with this enduring issue in America of poverty. The war on poverty started in 1968, and yet deep poverty is 50% or below at higher levels than it was back then. And we do have an issue in this country of a disparity of income. We do have an issue of the lack of upward mobility, the people just not being able to get back on their feet. And Washington plays a role here. Right now, sometimes a negative role. Because when you combine losing the subsidy and increasing the taxes, sometimes it's just too hard to get to that first rung of the economic ladder. And there we need reforms as well. Yes, we should be providing people the kind of safety net programs they need and a hand up, but not a handout and not this increased dependency we see around the country. As some of you know, I've been involved over the years in looking at some of the causes of poverty and dealing with them. And 10 years ago, wrote legislation called the Second Chance Act that deals with the issue of recidivism. People who get in this revolving door of prison, recidivism rates are incredibly high in this country. Where 50% of the people get out of prison are back in 2 or 3 years. And we all pay for it. In terms of increased crime, in terms of our communities, in terms of our taxes going to incarcerate people, $25,000, $35,000 a year. And in terms of those people's lives, not being able to turn them around, not being able to take care of their family and become productive citizens. So the second chance stuff works. And it's one of the causes of poverty, as does approaching drug addiction through prevention, treatment, and recovery. Another issue I've been involved with in the last 20 years. We talked about education reform, a critical issue. So I want to end with a story, and it's a hopeful story. And it's a story about a guy I met in Cleveland, Ohio. I was at a discussion with people who are taking advantage of this federal Second Chance Act It's federal matching funds. You've got to come up with a match locally. You've got to engage the community. You have to meet certain criteria, including testing what you're doing, all of which is not done in most anti-poverty programs. So Melvin is about my age, and he's in and out of prison a lot, 5 or 6 times in his life. He's a recovering addict. And he said, you know, Rob, every time I get out of prison, I get in trouble again. I go back to the old neighborhood and get back to my old habits. Melvin's been clean for 6 years. He now owns his own house, where, by the way, he lives with his daughter. He's never lived with her before, or any of his family members. And he has a job. And he did it all because when he got out this time, someone came to him and said, look, there's this program that you can join, and it's to give you a second chance, and it's to help you with the treatment and recovery that you need, and help you get the job skills you need. He's now got a job. He's a supervisor in the kitchen. He's now got the ability to take care of his daughter. He now has the dignity and self-respect that comes with work and comes with taking care of his family. We're a country that believes in second chance. We're a country that believes in opportunity. We're a country that believes that our best days will be ahead of us, I hope. I certainly believe that. I think we can find this new direction. I think we must. And I think we will. And I thank you all for what you do every day to try to make your communities better, make New Hampshire a better place to live and to work, and to help restore that American dream. Thank you for having me this morning. Look forward to questions.
Minutes for questions, and if you have questions, if you identify yourself or the company that you deal with. If I could just start off with the first question. An issue that the New England Council has been advocating this year in Congress is the Exim Bank and the reauthorization expires September 30th. The program that was instituted by President Roosevelt, a program that generates $1 billion in revenue every year to the Treasury that reduces the debt that we're all worried about. Majority of the senators support it. Makes sense. Unfortunately, there's gridlock in the House with the majority leader, the chairman of the banking committee, feel as though this is a program that should be wiped out. Your thoughts on the Exim Bank and where it's going to go on September 30th?
Where it's going to go is probably already been answered by my first response, which is not much is happening in Washington these days. But I do support it with reforms. And among those reforms are to make it more transparent, Jim, to ensure that it's not interfering in the marketplace. When I was U.S. Trade Representative, I had the opportunity to look around the world and see what other countries do. And in terms of financing exports, everyone's aggressive about it, more aggressive than we are, with the exception of the UK. I think all of our trading partners do more than we do. China, for instance, international, is very aggressive in financing. It has made money over the years, so it's not something that taxpayers can look at and say, gosh, this is costing us, because in the end, companies pay back these loans. And my view is really very simple. Over time, it would be great if every country got out of this business of financing, which just allowed the market to work. That's not the reality. That's not what's happening. And we would be shooting ourselves in the foot if we were to say, you know what, in this situation where America's economy is in trouble, where exports are not expanding as they should, where aggressive countries around the world, including these emerging economies, are taking market share from us, we're not going to play this game. We need to play. I do think more transparency is important, and putting in place some measures to ensure it's not competing with the private sector is important. And that's why I haven't co-sponsored the legislation we talked about. But I do support it. And I think we'd make a big mistake if we were to shoot ourselves in the foot and not be able to expand our exports. By the way, it should go along with, though, opening up more of our exports. Only 10% of the world has a trade agreement with the United States of America. You think about it, we don't have an agreement with China or with the European Union. We do have with countries, Latin America and Asia. 10% of the world takes 47% of our exports. So in that 10%, we send 47% of the goods and services made by American workers, produced by American farmers, sent by American service providers, including some of which we might talk to this morning. So that's what we got to do, in addition to making sure that we're trying to level the playing field in terms of financing, that we also ensure that we are opening markets. When we do that, What happens is we have the ability to compete. When we have that ability to compete, we'll use this fine. We'll do a lot better if we create that environment for success in Washington. By reforming our tax code, coming up with a better regulatory system, the issues we talked about in terms of education, job training, using energy even more efficiently. So there's some things that I'm really excited about in terms of trade, if we can get this trade promotion authority done, because we can expand more exports.
Congressman Michael Tarrant.
Michael, how are you? Nice to see you.
You've been in both branches over long and I think very substantive career. I'm in the man on scene category, is the broken branch. Without starting a riot here, I would move to a parliamentary system this afternoon, but could you give us an overview of your thoughts as it relates to what you would do in dealing with at least that characterization in terms of the dysfunctionality of the current era of Congress?
Well, as I said earlier, I think we get back in recent history, even forgetting, going back over the great history of our country where we've been able to solve big problems by finding common ground. It wasn't so long ago when we were able to figure out how to solve these big problems and to do it in a bipartisan way. And frankly, it takes presidential leadership. Nothing big has happened in recent history without having presidential involvement, engagement, and leadership. It also takes, as you indicate, the legislative branch to be able to work with that president and get things done. But what happens, and I'll give you an example, 1983 with Social Security reform, people said, Ronald Reagan was crazy to engage in that because the Democrats would use it politically and would beat up Republicans, as they're pretty good at doing on Social Security, Medicare, and issues like that. And Reagan said, we're going to do the right thing. And we're going to go forward with this. That was 1983. Ronald Reagan was real popular in 1982 and 83. People remember Ronald Reagan as having been this incredibly popular former president, and he took to make some tough decisions. 81, 82, 83. After doing that, Social Security reform, and frankly providing cover to Republicans, and Tip O'Neill and Democrats providing cover to Democrats. In the election in 1984, Ronald Reagan went on to win every single state but one, Minnesota. Now, in today's political climate, that might be more challenging. But I don't think we should throw in the towel. I think instead we should insist on principled leadership. I'm not talking about people compromising their values and their principles. I'm talking about establishing what the objective is. What's the result? Well, the result is to have a competitive tax code. We all agree with that. Instead of saying, these people are economic deserters and saying we're going to take away this tax benefit or that, which will only make them even less competitive, therefore even more right to be a target of a foreign takeover. Let's actually fix the problem here. By the way, every single one of our competitors has done that with regard to taxes, as an example. The last time we lowered the rate was 1986 with Ronald Reagan. We wanted it to be below the average. Now it's the highest of all the developed countries. Not since the 1960s have we reformed our national tax code. Since the 80s when we lowered our rate, every single one of our competitors have reformed their tax code and lowered the rate. All of them, except us. So I don't think we need a huge adjustment to our system to a parliamentary type democracy. What I do think we need is some leadership and for people to insist on it. And frankly, I think Republicans and Democrats alike need to do a better job of talking about the need for us to find common ground and why that's important, why it matters in the daily lives of the citizens we represent.
Other questions? Judy?
Senator Judy Lawrence.
Judy? Good.
Thank you. I share a lot of the concerns that you just mentioned in your speech about where the direction of the country and where we're headed and how we can change that direction. And I'm wondering, and I agree that a lot of it is the dysfunction that's happening right now in Washington, and I'm wondering if you could share with us what I think is more than a passing interest in some of the Senate races that are happening and how you see those shaping up and how that might change and reframe what's happening in Washington.
Yeah, good question. I mentioned earlier the poll that I was most interested in this month was the one about the fact that people don't think the next generation is going to be better than the current one, and that's troubling because it means people feeling that anxiety and that uncertainty. But I am looking at other polls too, including this morning I got my little playbook from Politico, and they were talking about some of the polling around the country, and let's face it, it's too close to call. There are states that are literally, when you look at the RCP average, that's real pure politics, you go online and aggregate all the polls. There are states, probably 4 or 5 of them, where it is 1 point separating Republican and Democrat. So it's going to be very close this year, I think. I think in the end, it would be surprising if Republicans didn't prevail, because there are 7 states where there's a Democrat representing not just a red state, but a Romney red state. 6 of those, President Obama got less than 42% of the vote. There's only 1 state represented by a Republican, it's a blue state. And that's me, that's Susan Collins. And she's doing great, your neighbor. So I would think that at the end of the day, we'll be okay. I'm the national finance chair for the majority efforts. As I said, I'm very interested in it. That does change the dynamic. So to answer your question there, I just believe that the current dynamic is flawed. I think the president's not likely to come to the table. I look at 1994 and what happened when Bill Clinton, again, without any great love for Newt Gingrich, was able to come to the table and say, let's see what we can do together. Now they took both sides, being willing to do that. But that's the model I look to. And I think if I were President Obama and I was looking at my term in office and thinking, what is the legacy? Are we going to be happy with 1-2% growth? We're going to be happy with the lowest labor participation rate of men in the history of our country? Are we going to be happy with the kind of uncertainty and anxiety we feel? I would think he'd want to do some things that focus like a laser on jobs and growth and getting us back on track in terms of dealing with this debt and deficit. Again, the legacy will be in part having added more debt to the balance sheet than all the presidents combined. Already that's true with regard to public debt. I think it's likely to be true with regard to the overall debt as well. So I would hope that we would be able to come together, at least on these things we talked about this morning. Some of the other issues, some of the social issues, some more controversial issues around Obamacare won't be resolved. But there is an opportunity for us to focus on these economic and fiscal issues. And I think the next 2 years could be very productive if we had a change, and therefore a different dynamic in Washington.
Jim?
Just wanted to speak a little bit about natural gas. It's a big issue in New England, trying to get more natural gas out there. And where you see federal policy going, I know it's energy efficiency, renewables, but there is balance and
No, it's a great question and a huge opportunity for us. We're now, as I say, the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. We're discoverable natural gas in any country in the world. And it's partly because of our technology, partly because of the land that is available. We can do a lot more on public land, including offshore, which I support. I think it's important for us to be able to take full advantage of this and bring back manufacturing. We're seeing this in Ohio. It's really exciting. Over the last 6 months, there have been 3 companies that have come back, 2 from Mexico, 1 from China. And when I ask them why, I've been to over 150 plant tours in the last several years, they say a lot of it's natural gas. Knowing you have that, not just relatively expensive natural gas now, but the sense that because of the supply, there is this stability going forward in that pricing. And they feel comfortable coming here, back to America. And that's great. We got to do it. But you're right, we have an infrastructure problem. So we're producing natural gas in Ohio, making us an energy exporting state again. It's fantastic, and yet the pipeline structure is not adequate to be able to deliver that natural gas to places like New England where we have such a need for it. We saw that this past winter. We had a polar vortex, and frankly, it was pretty scary. We didn't have the infrastructure or the grid even to be able to ensure that we weren't going to have brownouts. And obviously, we had a propane crisis that some of you probably were involved with. And I've just introduced legislation on that with some Democrats to try to come up with a way for us to better predict what our propane needs are to avoid both the high prices that we had last winter and the scarcity of propane. So I think it's really exciting what's happening, but we've got to figure out a way to get the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission and others involved in infrastructure more focused on how do you truly take advantage of it by providing these avenues to be able to move the natural gas two refineries in areas of the country, including Maywood, where there still is a scarcity. Other questions? Yes, Representative.
Senator, Mike Festa, ARP, Massachusetts. I'm not going to ask you a Social Security question, but I do want to return to the question of bipartisanship. You mentioned Second Chance Act. I certainly know from having observed your actions in those days that the effort to be bipartisan, to find common ground on a very tough political issue, crime policy, you were part of that. You were very intimate to that happening, and a very successful thing that you mentioned today. But the question I have for you is this. We haven't really talked about the money and politics piece. Don't you agree that the fundamental problem in 2014 is that everyone in this country is just inundated with the negativity around politics, in the advertising, in the bashing of the candidates, to each other, and that really what you're getting is a very, very low bottom of common ground. There's just no way to find, any positive things about your opponent during a campaign, and then you wonder how do you pick that up in January when you now have to work with these people. How do you see the tone of the conversation in campaigns changing when you have these third-party influences and this fundamental shift in the respect people have in the process of government and settling differences in a civilized way?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. I don't have an easy answer for it. I do think speech includes the ability to spend money to promote whatever your position is, and so I do think we continue to have a lot of campaign rhetoric, both positive and negative. As you say, the negative seems to work, I guess. That's why there's more and more negative ads and so on. I will say the one difference that I've experienced, even since 2010 when I ran for the Senate in Ohio, is the ability online to be able to communicate and the degree to which people are accessing online sources of information. And that can be both positive or negative, depending on what it is. But it gives candidates at least the ability, in a relatively inexpensive way, to get their message out about what they're for. One of my concerns about the own party, as you can imagine, is that we're too often represented, and I think misrepresented, as a party that's against. And one reason I thought this was very important, and thank you, Jim, is that we need to stand for something, and we do. We don't always communicate that, but there's a way to do it now that was not available even in 2010 in terms of the number of people who were actually accessing sources online. It is incredibly powerful. So I agree with you, particularly about the airwaves and some of the ads and some of the dark mail pieces and so on. And I'm not saying everything online is positive either, but at least candidates have the opportunity to say to their potential voters and those of us who are like our constituents, hey, this is what I've done, this is what I'll do, this is what I'm for, not what someone else says I'm against. And I think that's something that we need to take more advantage of. And certainly, those of us in office, I'm sure you're doing that. I'm doing that. So I think that's very positive. On Second Chance, thank you for your help on that over the years. And I would just make one simple comment. We're locking too many people up instead of figuring out ways to turn their lives around. And we know what works. You know what works. You and I talked about this earlier. And it is much more active prevention education. I'm the author of the Drug-Free Communities Act 20 years ago. It's actually working. There are 2,000 coalitions that have come out of that. But it's also about much more effective treatment and recovery. And we're learning more about that. And there are some new medications that are very effective. And if we don't get at this issue, we're not going to be able to deal, in my view, with these underlying causes of poverty, because that's one of the causes. Not just the drug use, but also the devastation in poor communities in America because of the so-called drug war. So I think this is one area where you have been very involved over the years with Jessica Nickel and others on my team, and I think we can make incredible progress. And I think on a nonpartisan basis, this is something that we ought to do and can do.
Give you time for 2 more questions. Young lady here, and on there.
Thank you, Clara Monier, and I'm also with the AARP. He didn't ask the Social Security question, but I'm just curious. There are a number of solutions to the problems where Social Security is heading. Some of them, I'm not a devastating. If we take care of them right away, it will not be a catastrophe in a few years. Yet I think that is a place where you could start to compromise or build partnerships. Why does it happen, or what are your thoughts on what
I think
we should do?
you said it really well, and I appreciate ARP, working with some of us who, as Jim said earlier, I've been focused on this issue. It's the third rail of American politics. Being the New York subway system, third rail is electrified. You grab it and you die politically. We have to grab it. If we don't, our country will go bankrupt. I mean, it's as simple as that. It's not a matter of ideology, it's a matter of math. These entitlement programs are incredibly important. That's why we need to save it. And the one I've been pushing, as you may know, and very frustrated that we haven't been able to make progress on, but I would put it as, I remember I mentioned 3 things that could be done in the first 100 days. I'll say this is a 4th. I'm hopeful, okay? Which is to say, let's put more means testing into Social Security and Medicare. It already is means testing, but we can do more. And specifically with regard to Medicare, as you know, the President put a proposal in his budget saying those who make over $170,000 a year as a couple, they have to pay a little more in their premium for Part B, for doctor visits, but also for Part D, for their prescription drugs, and for those people who can afford it. And these are people who on average would have $3 or $4 million in net assets if they have about $170,000 in income. They'd be asked to pay a little more for their participation, their premium. That, by the way, has enormous impacts on the Social Security Trust Fund, the Medicare Trust Fund over time. It starts off small, but maybe $60 billion in savings under the President's proposal in the first 10 years, second 10 years, about $450 billion in savings, which is what you're referring to. Small things now can have enormous impacts in later years. If we don't do this, according to the Congressional Budget Office, we are looking at adding another $10 trillion, that's $10,000 billion in debt in the next 10 years. And then probably another 30, the most likely scenario, trillion in the next 10 years after that. And then it just goes up. So there are some things that we can and should do. And I think this is in the President's budget. This is something that, frankly, I've been promoting. And when I go to my Democrat colleagues, they say, Rob, we can't touch anything on the entitlement side without raising taxes on the rich. And I say to them, well, wait a minute. This is raising taxes on the rich. This is asking the wealthy, or Americans, wealthier Americans, to pay more, which is equivalent to taxing them more. And they say, no, you can't touch entitlements without taxing the rich under a tax code. It makes no sense. There's no logic here. So I think this is a small step, but an important step in the right direction that will have enormous savings, particularly in the second 10 years. And it's one that I've been out there promoting, sometimes to my political peril, because some groups have taken me on it and said, well, important, it's not for Social Security. I am. That's the whole point. I want to save this program. I want it to be there for future generations. And so I think that's a great example of what you're talking about, and I would add as number 4 this morning, what could happen if we had just a little bipartisanship and found some common ground.
One final question.
Bob Bates, former mayor of Manchester. My comment goes back to bipartisanship. When you're a mayor of the city, you cannot deal with issues.
Microphone.
You try to deal with things in Washington.
Microphone.
And that's, as a former mayor, I recognize that the gridlock that you're talking about cannot take place when you govern a city. You have to talk to people. You're up close and personal with them.
You have to balance the budget.
You have to balance budgets too. Yeah, but my point is, when I was a new mayor, I went down to Washington right after September 11th, and went in to meet with Dick Gephardt at the time. Obviously, he was thinking about politics at the time, and I went into Washington that dramatically changed with security that you just wouldn't believe, especially right after September 11th. It certainly is much better now. And I was kind of in awe of being he was in Sam Raven's former office building, and as a new person into politics, I was kind of intrigued by it, but I had a chance to meet with him one-on-one, and I said to him, how often do you and the Speaker of the House meet, thinking our nation's in crisis, there are so many challenges before us? And he said to me, Mayor, we don't even talk to each other. So that was after the greatest national crisis in the history of our country, And I know you talked about presidential leadership, but, we had a Republican president at the time that still was ingrained in the philosophy of Washington, that we just don't talk to each other to solve problems. I'd be interested in hearing from you, who do you work with in your colleagues in a bipartisan manner to help solve some of these problems, to give us a sense of who you are as a leader? My sense is you are bipartisan, but can you talk a little bit about that issue, that we don't even talk to each other, and what you are doing on your side to try to change that?
Thanks, Bob. It's a great question. One thing I didn't mention is almost all of these proposals have bipartisan roots, and a number of them I'm involved with. So, as example, we talked about regulatory reform. I've authored 3 bills in that area, all 3 of which are bipartisan, all 3 of which I believe could pass with a 60-vote margin if we can get it to the floor of the Senate. All 3 of which have passed the House. 2 of the 3 have passed the House already. And so in that case, Mark Pryor is my co-sponsor on one, who's running down Arkansas, and it's on regulatory accountability, simply saying let's use cost-benefit analysis, including on the independent agencies. The other is related to permitting, where America has fallen to number 34 on the global list in terms of time it takes to permit, the ease of doing business. It's harder and harder in America because of the federal government having so many rules and requirements and overlapping jurisdictions, so it puts accountability into the permitting process and ensures that some of the legal liability is removed so you can actually permit things, including oil and gas, but also wind and solar. We've got a good bipartisan group there. My co-sponsor there is Clarence Castle, a Democrat from Missouri. And we've also got legislation, as was mentioned, on second chance and on drug-free communities, all of which are bipartisan. So I do a lot that's bipartisan, and I'm very proud of that. I don't think that we're going to solve our problems unless we make these things bipartisan. We have to find common ground. I believe in all these issues. I've stuck to my principles, but I've reached out to be able to, make some concessions to the other side sometimes. You remember what it was like as mayor. You don't get everything you want. And that's part of the solution. It's part of the answer to Mike's question. And look, this is how you do it in your daily lives. Jane will tell you, in our marriage, we figure things out. But we don't always get our way. And the same is true in your marriages and your businesses and your dealings with government, for those of you who are involved in public service, if you're going to get to a result. And that's what we need desperately in this country. It's not that hard. Yes, the political climate is more difficult today, even poisonous in some respects. And the gray line seems to be sort of ingrained in the Washington politician mind. But not too long ago, we were able to figure out how to do these things. I use Ronald Reagan a lot as an example because I do think, a lot of Republicans use him as an example of what they're looking for. Well, Ronald Reagan used to say, it's amazing what can get accomplished when you don't care who gets the credit. I keep that on my desk. And I think that's a very deep thought, maybe more profound than people initially think. Because a lot of what's happening in Washington is about politics. Who gets the credit? Who gets the blame? And it should be about how do you achieve the result. Let's agree on the objective, as I said, and then let's figure out how to get there. If we do that, I really believe America's best days can be made. I really do. I think we have the infrastructure, and we have the education system, and we have the people, the entrepreneurial spirit is still out there. People want to be able to create for their kids and grandkids a better life. They don't think it's going to happen now. And all Washington needs to do is create that environment for success. Washington doesn't create jobs. It should never try to do that. But Washington can create the environment for success or the environment for failure. And right now, I believe we're headed down the wrong track. And there's an opportunity for us to take a new direction. Let's embrace it. Let's not throw in the towel and say this is the new normal. Everything's going to be gridlocked, and we're not going to be able to have this American dream for those ensuing generations. Let's say, yeah, we can do it. We always have. And we'll figure it out. It's going to require leadership, and it's going to require finding that common ground as you did as mayor. Thank you all very much. Great to be here.
Acknowledge the presence of the former chair of the New England Council, a fellow alum, Tom Rath. I heard him say into the Senate, the best 7 years of my life. Enjoyed every year. Lou D'Alessandro, the state senator from District 20, is also here. I just want to thank him for being here. I've often said that
where we go to an opening of an envelope. He's everywhere. A great public servant. Great public servant. And let me also just thank the senator for finding time to be here today. Obviously, you know that he's a very serious lawmaker, and we don't have enough serious lawmakers who think an awful lot about the problems we have. But then he goes a step further to say, I think I have some ideas. Some of them are outside the box, as he alluded to, that might cause some criticism and arrows being directed at him, but he's willing to do that in order to move the country forward, to grow the economy, so we can have 4 or 5% growth annually. But the point is that we need people like the Senator in the United States Senate, so we're very fortunate having you today. I would ask, before we leave, if we could just have a moment of silence for James Foley and his family, that they find strength in the next coming days, months, and years ahead. As all of us know, your neighbor right up in Rochester, and a friend to many people. So with that, a moment of silence for James Foley and his family. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing the Senator in Washington, New England, one never knows, but I want to thank him for being here today. Thank our sponsors again for making this such a great success. Thank our leader here at St. Anselm, President DeSalvo, and we wish you a happy Labor Day coming up. Thank you very much.